Hi, welcome everyone. I see quite a few familiar names on the list, but if you're not a current grant writing client, I look forward to sharing this information with you. I've been the grant coordinator at Support Kansas City for a little over 6 years, and I help a number of different nonprofits in the Kansas City area with their grant writing. All different kinds of nonprofits, arts organizations, youth development, medical organizations, homelessness organizations. So there's a wide range of the kinds of grants that I write. Using AI is definitely a helpful tool. In preparing for this presentation, I learned a lot, but I am by no means an expert. I've read a few articles, I've played with it, but this is going to be a pretty entry-level presentation, but I hope there are some practical tips that you all can learn from it. I know that there are people out there, probably not on this webinar, who are opposed to AI and don't want to use it, but that's really hard to do. In the world that we live in, you are already using AI. Here are just a few basic examples. Your credit card company uses AI to detect unfamiliar spending patterns and then notifies you. Customer service lines and chatbots, those work by using AI. Basic spell check, autocorrect, grammar tools, all AI-based. Automatic braking systems in cars are one of the oldest forms of AI that's been around for over 50 years. So some more modern uses that I'm sure everybody would recognize are Netflix, when it recommends shows for you, that's based on AI. And when Siri or Alexa answers your questions, those are built on AI models as well. Today, we're going to focus primarily on one kind of AI. There are a lot of different kinds. We're going to focus on the generative AI model and a specific type of this model called ChatGPT, as that's the one that I think most people might be familiar with, and that's the one that I'm familiar with. It's a large language model. Some other AI tools you may use or be familiar with include Bard, that's Google's version. Microsoft has Copilot, and there's DALL-E, that's an image generator by the same open AI that does ChatGPT. There's a lot of websites at the end of the slides, and there's going to be a document sent with the slides that have a lot more information on different types of AI and the different programs that you can use. Generative AI is designed to create text or images in response to user prompts. It uses what's called machine learning to return an output based on the prompt. AI engineers train the technology using massive data sets, and the AI consults the data set when determining its answer. I always thought that AIs like ChatGPT were taking your prompt and then searching the internet like a search engine would for keywords and then cutting and pasting the copy that they give back to you. But really, it's a mathematical model. So instead of generating, or rather, ChatGPT generates its own content rather than copying and pasting content or just spitting it back to you. It doesn't comb the internet. It works by recognizing patterns and using mathematical probabilities or values, and assigning those with a weight to give a prediction for your answer. AI tools are trained on 45 terabytes of web information, and that's the equivalent of 56 million books. So they have a lot of information and they can do it almost instantly, which is pretty amazing. But because it is predictive, sometimes it's correct and sometimes it isn't. As a result, it's not necessarily going to give you the best answer, but it will give you the most common answer by assigning values to those strings of words. Now we're going to look at some of the pros and cons of these generative AI models and ChatGPT in particular. As I mentioned, one of the positives is it's really fast. It's almost real-time responses. And if you've worked with it at all, I'm sure you've seen how quickly it can just return loads of information. It delivers one unified answer as opposed to, say, a Google search that's going to give you pages of hits. It has a more conversational interface. It really is just like speaking to a person and asking questions and getting responses. It has a ton of uses and a lot of capabilities. Obviously, everything has some negatives. It can be inaccurate. It can make errors. It can lie. It can even hallucinate. And the quality of the answers you get will vary. Another thing that is a negative is that even when it knows it's wrong, it can still be very convincing, which you don't want errors and you don't want very convincing errors. The conversations are not necessarily private unless you take extra steps to make sure that your information is encrypted or on a specific host that offers that service. Anything generated by AI is not protected by US copyright law. I assume there will be things changing in that area. The laws are still developing. Europe has codified and made a lot more progress on establishing guidelines for AI. The US, different states are catching up, but as of right now, there is no overall federal guidance for AI in the United States. Another negative about ChatGPT and other similar models is they use tons of energy and computer power. It takes a lot of space, a lot of equipment, a lot of power to run these things. And another con that's a little more relevant to what we would be using ChatGPT for in grant writing is a lot of the models don't cite sources, or they might make up citations. They might have old information depending on when their model was developed. If you do need citations to things like academic studies, there's an AI tool called perplexity.ai, and that's a good one to use if you need citations. Now we're going to delve a little deeper into the basics of the prompts for grant writing. As I said previously, the prompt is what you enter into the interface with ChatGPT. It's not a command or a query, it's called a prompt. If you enter a very basic prompt, you'll get a very basic answer. You don't enter keywords like you would in a Google search. You need to set the stage for your question with as much or as little detail as you want. But you need to consider whether your prompt is complete enough for ChatGPT to give you a good response. Here's a very basic example. Instead of using a prompt like, write a paragraph about our nonprofit, you might instead use a prompt like, please describe our nonprofit's mission, the key programs we offer, and our target demographics. This more specific prompt will help ChatGPT generate more relevant and useful content for you. Some of the common ways that we can draft prompts to help with grant writing. The first one I'm going to talk about is assigning ChatGPT a role or a persona. This is where in your question, in your prompt, you tell ChatGPT to act as a grant application reviewer, act as a grant writer, act as a potential donor, depending on what type of tone you want the answer to take. Here's a sample prompt. Review my response to this question, acting as a grant application reviewer, and tell me if I have answered all parts of the question completely. Anybody that does a lot of grant writing knows that there are those questions that have 5 parts, each with subparts, and it can be really tricky to make sure your answer addresses every single part of that question. So that's where something like that, telling ChatGPT to act as a reviewer and review the response, can be really helpful. The next type of prompt has to do with audiences. So for this one, you're going to tell ChatGPT in your prompt to address a particular type of audience. For example, you can say, ask it your question and then say, have your response address a corporation. Have your response address an individual donor. Have your response address a church. Have your response address a large government agency. Obviously, those different audiences are going to have very different results in the output that you will get. And another thing I really like using ChatGPT for is to add some data. You put specific data in and tell ChatGPT what to do with the data. This is great for outcomes, for budget narratives. And for example, I just learned today from SKC grant writer Lindsay Buckley that you can enter a list of zip codes into ChatGPT and it will tell you what counties those different zip codes are from. That can be very helpful if that's something that your organization doesn't track and all of a sudden you're faced with a great question that asks you that. We talked a little bit about tone in the other prompts, but specifically, you can ask ChatGPT for a particular style, tone, or vocabulary level. For example, you might write a grant for a medical research nonprofit, but you happen to know that the reviewer is not a medical professional. So you might want to include in your prompt that the response should be written without using any complex medical terms. So it's similar to audience, but you can guide the prompt to very specifically shape the response. And another thing that may not be your first instinct when you're working with ChatGPT is to refine your prompt. If you don't get the answer you want the first time, ask ChatGPT to give you another answer. You can also start off asking it for several different answers at once. Say, give me 3 examples of a response to X question. And then you can choose the one that makes the most sense. You can also ask it to shorten or elaborate on a response. I've found that it responds pretty well to requests for specific grade level language. For example, can you rephrase your answer using the equivalent of 9th grade language? And it will do just that. If you want it to emphasize or de-emphasize a particular portion of its previous answer, go ahead and ask, and that will give it the guidance to give you an even better answer. This is something new that I learned in preparing for this presentation, and that is adding images to the prompt. ChatGPT can pull information from an image to use in its response. I just put a random image in to test this out. The photo of this typewriter on the slide, I put that photo into ChatGPT and just asked it, what do you see? Here is its response. The image shows a vintage typewriter with a piece of paper in the carriage that has the words "write something" typed on it. The visual suggests a prompt or inspiration to begin writing, likely evoking creativity or motivation to start a project. The retro typewriter adds a nostalgic or classic feel to the theme of writing. I don't know about you, but that's probably a better description than I could have written about the photo. So you can take photos of your nonprofit, of your events, of other things having to do with your mission and your vision, and put those images into ChatGPT and see what it comes up with. And this is also helpful if you are wanting to include adaptive accessibility on your website, to draft those image descriptions. Same with social media. Another thing ChatGPT can do is come up with its own prompts. Just ask it, what would be the best prompt to answer this question while including this information? And it will give you the prompt. And it does learn from previous examples. So the more you work with it, the better it will be at understanding your prompts and what you want from them. Another thing that I use it for frequently is to put in what I've written and ask it to improve the response. You can ask specific ways you'd like it to be improved, or you can just say the general, please improve this response. You can ask it to make it more persuasive, to simplify the language, add more about a certain topic, for example. Also, if you want a really structured result, like with bullet points or with numbers, put those in your prompt and you will get output that has bullet points or numbers if that's what you're looking for. You can also ask it to provide its response in the form of a table, which can be helpful. And conversely, you can put a table into ChatGPT and ask it to give you the results in plain English or prose. This is really helpful for those grant portals that won't accept any kind of table or chart or formatting. ChatGPT can describe what that chart or table is showing. Another really great use that I have found for it is to summarize those multi-page PDF grant instructions and scoring rubrics. Getting a summary of a multi-page guidelines for a grant is very helpful, especially when you're starting the process, to make sure that your organization aligns with the grant before you go to all the trouble of drafting it and reading that however many long page PDF with their instructions. So now that we've covered the different types of prompts, I'm going to delve a little deeper into specific uses of ChatGPT for grant writing. And some of you may be utilizing some of these already, some of these may be new to you, and a lot of them can be adapted for other areas of fund development, not just grant writing. One of the main things I think it's used for with regard to grant writing is brainstorming responses to application questions. For example, a question that almost every grant asks is, how does your project align with the foundation's mission? So you can provide the details of your project, provide the funder's RFP, and ask ChatGPT that question. This is going to save you time during the initial drafting phase, and it's going to ensure that there is alignment there, or at least help you see what in general that alignment may be, or if there's not alignment, it'll point that out too. And again, this is just a place to start to brainstorm those answers. You can ask it to help articulate the need your agency seeks to address, also known as the statement of the problem. That's something that sometimes clients have trouble putting into words. We know there's a problem. We know we want grant funds to fix it, but how can we thoroughly and competently explain what that need is and how we're going to address it? Similarly, you can use ChatGPT to demonstrate the impact of your nonprofit. One way is to use it to refine your client stories. Client stories are great to put in grants. They help the reviewer remember you. They help you stand out. But you may not love the way your client stories came to you. They may need editing. They may be too long. They may be too short, and you need to combine a few. You can put in a number of stories or testimonials and ask ChatGPT to provide language that shows what some of your qualitative outcomes are that you can then use in your outcomes section. It can also project future impact over different time periods. For example, let's say you are a food pantry and you help 100 families a week. You can ask ChatGPT, how can I show how this data translates into positive change in the community over a period of months or years? And a third way to use it is probably already pretty plain: proofreading and editing. Even if you're just using the tools in Microsoft Word, those are AI-based. Going beyond this, ChatGPT can be used to find inconsistencies in tone or writing style. For example, if you have a number of different people at your organization contributing to a grant, you might ask ChatGPT to review the responses and see if there are inconsistencies, because different people write differently. And if you want that application to have one overall unifying tone or voice, this can help with that process. It can also help you customize your proposals. I'm sure most nonprofits have already developed some form of boilerplate language that they use in their grants. ChatGPT can help you personalize this for different funders' focus areas, different audiences. You can use it to create several versions of your grant proposals depending on the type of funder. So how you would do that is you would put information about the funder, their guidelines, or their RFP into ChatGPT, and then add your response to a question and use a prompt such as, does my response to X question match this funder's guidelines? Another good use of ChatGPT for brainstorming is ideas for outcomes, data collection, and timelines. A lot of my grant writing clients struggle with creating timelines for their projects, and that's certainly understandable. You're asked to provide a description, provide a budget, and then provide a project timeline for something that may not start for a year or more out. So asking ChatGPT for a sample timeline for a particular project or program is a place to start. And then you can edit it and add specifics. A question that comes up occasionally on grants I've seen recently is, how can your nonprofit involve the community it serves in its decision-making process? And I had some ideas about how that could be done, but I didn't have a lot of ideas. So I asked ChatGPT that question, and it gave me some new ideas that I hadn't thought of. If you've been writing very many grants, you've heard the term SMART outcomes. Funders want SMART outcomes. These are outcomes that spell out the word SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. For better or worse, a lot of outcomes don't necessarily meet all those criteria, but that is what funders are looking for. You can put your outcomes in there and ask ChatGPT, do they meet all these requirements? And if they don't, ask it to help you brainstorm additional outcomes that do meet these requirements. Another way to use it is for data collection methods. There's a lot of different ways to collect data, and ChatGPT can be a good place to start to recommend what data collection methods would be the most useful for your particular project or situation. And finally, the budget narrative. That's often the most dreaded portion of the application, but if you ask the funder, it's the most helpful, most useful one to them. If you haven't done a budget narrative or a complicated budget justification before, you can use ChatGPT to help you articulate why each item is necessary for achieving the program's goals, even if it may be something obvious like, why do you need staff to get the outcomes for your nonprofit? The funder wants that answer to that question. So ChatGPT can also ensure that your budget narrative aligns with the funder's priorities, such as if a particular funder is emphasizing sustainability or capacity building, you can ask ChatGPT to review your budget narrative with an eye to those parameters. A clear and well-justified budget narrative is really going to help your application stand out to those reviewers. Now I'm going to talk about just a couple of general tips that apply specifically to grant writing, but again, can be applied to any type of nonprofit or business writing. One of the things that can be time consuming about writing grants is character and word counts. ChatGPT is very helpful with this. You can input the original text of your response in and ask it to generate a summary of the text if you're trying to shorten it. You can tell it the desired length of the summary. It doesn't always do exact word counts, but you can definitely ask it to shorten or lengthen a response. You will always want to make sure you review the summary and make sure that it didn't leave any key information out. I've also researched a little bit about how to make ChatGPT or other machine generated language sound more natural. And you may have heard me say the word delve a few times previously in this presentation. And it's just on my mind because I read an article that said, is there one word that's a shortcut to detecting AI written work? And the answer to that question, the article said, was the word delve. They did a study of a bunch of scholarly articles. There was something like a 2,000% increase in the word delve, and it was determined that that aligned with AI use. ChatGPT likes to provide qualified language like can or may. These possibility qualifiers, they're called, are words that express a possibility, like the word possible or probable. If you have language like that coming out in your responses from ChatGPT, it's not going to be very strong language. Our project will possibly help people. That's not what you want to come across in a grant application. So you want to replace those with definitive words, will, definitely, certainly. If content you're writing or editing is too long, another way to shorten it is ask ChatGPT to highlight all the adverbs and adjectives in the text. And if there are qualifiers that go with those, such as very, you can remove those and that'll help with your word count also. ChatGPT also likes to use ordinals, firstly, secondly, thirdly, in the first place, in the second place, and so on. Most people don't tend to write like that for grant applications, so it can sound a little bit like AI if you're seeing that come out in your responses. Similarly, repetitive language, use of the same words and phrases over and over again can be an indication that something has been AI drafted. The easiest thing to fix is personalization. If you're getting responses that aren't personalized for your agency or organization, make sure you go in and use your nonprofit's name. Use the names of your leadership staff. Use acronyms that are unique to your organization. Include personal stories and descriptions, or in other words, make anything you're putting into a grant application personal to your organization. If it's very vague and very bland, it's going to stand out as AI generated. ChatGPT likes to use unnecessary words like moreover, thus, therefore, and henceforth that are filler words and don't sound natural. Be sure to check any responses and remove any of those unnecessary words. I've put on the slide some other phrases that ChatGPT really likes to overuse. And if you want to read more about that, there's a link to an article on that slide. The good thing is about all these things that definitely show that something is AI generated is there are some tips to make it less AI generated sounding. In ChatGPT itself, you can go to the top left and choose Explore GPTs, and that gives you a number of custom built machines, tools, whatever you want to call them. And one of those is called an AI humanizer. So if you put AI humanizer in that box, you can use that to try to make the language sound more human. Another trick to humanizing language is to change the settings. There are settings for ChatGPT. There's a circle with your initials or photo in it in the upper right-hand corner. If you click on this and go to settings, then personalization, and then customize ChatGPT, there's a prompt. It asks you, how would you like ChatGPT to respond? And you can put in that box a list of the words that you want it to avoid using. So some of those overused phrases, qualifying, possessive adjectives, ordinal, first, second, third type of things, anything that you don't want to see in the responses, you can put it in that box, so it won't use them. Another thing you can do, just write in your prompts, is tell ChatGPT exactly what you want. I've given an example of a prompt on the slide that does this. Also, you can tell it exactly what you don't like. ChatGPT sometimes overuses certain sentence structures, so you can tell it, don't write sentence structures like this one, because you do that too often and it's monotonous. So if you tell it that, it will learn. And the important thing with these instructions are to repeat them until you find that the responses are not using the things that you don't want them to anymore. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the broader uses of AI for nonprofits and fund development professionals. Everyone should be using some sort of AI assistant in virtual meetings to take minutes. Even if you have someone taking the minutes, it's great to have the machine version of it. It transcribes the conversation, it organizes the discussion, it will automate a to-do list for you. It's just a very helpful tool. And some of those different tool program names are on this slide. You can also use ChatGPT to translate copy to other languages. It's a good way to put written materials from your nonprofit into languages used by the demographic your agency serves, translating things for your website or for informational brochures, things like that. Again, as with everything else, you want to have a human check it to make sure it's not making something up. As far as hiring, larger companies are using ChatGPT to analyze and summarize resumes. A better, more applicable use for a small nonprofit would be to help draft job descriptions. That can be something that's difficult if you're not familiar with how to do that. Same with employee rules or handbooks. ChatGPT is a good place to get started with those. One of the great things you can use it for is summarizing data. You can put in previous grant applications, information from your website, your annual report, and ask ChatGPT to summarize this. You can attach PDF documents to your prompt. There's also a specific tool called Chat PDF. It's at chatpdf.com. It's a free site. The page limit on that one is 120 pages, but you can upload an article, a presentation, and then have it be analyzed or summarized. And this is really time saving when you're trying to research something for your organization. There's another tool, it's called QChat, and that can be used to create training programs for staff. If you're familiar with something called Quizlet, QChat is an AI tutor that uses Chat GPT and Quizlet in order to create training videos, which saves time, and then those are always accessible for new staff for learning. Another really useful thing that Chat GPT can do is to repurpose language you already have. You have your mission and vision statements and your purpose. You have all this great language. You have a newsletter. You have an annual report. Have Chat GPT take that information and create posts for social media, create language for special events or promotional materials. You've already got all of that language, but sometimes it's nice to have a little help in figuring out how to rephrase that for another use. Another really great tool is Canva. It has something called Magic Design. It's a free plan. It allows you to create social media posts and presentations. It will even edit videos based on your short prompts or descriptions. It's really the most helpful for creating rough drafts to get started, and then you have to edit the design. And now we're going to look at a specific example of how you might use ChatGPT to draft custom communication for segmented donors. I was thinking about this question, how many different kinds of donors are there? And I could list off the top of my head 5 or 6. I asked ChatGPT the question, what different kinds of donors are there? And it came up with 10. That was definitely more than I had thought of. So you want to then ask it, this is a multi-part process. You've asked it, who are the different types of segmented donors? And then you can go back and ask it for each one that applies to your organization, how can I tailor my messaging for each type of donor to result in more engagement, more email open rates, ultimately more impact for your nonprofit. Another example that I have here on the next slide is about special events. Again, I tried to think about what are some new fun special events that a nonprofit could use for fundraising, and I couldn't come up with very many, but it came up with 10, and any of them may or may not be feasible for your organization, but it was a really easy way to think of some new ideas without doing a really long web search. And then the second step on this slide, as you'll see, once you have that list of new ideas, you can take the ones that appeal to you and use the prompt to ask ChatGPT, how will this specifically help with my organization? What parts of this are the most helpful to raise money for what we do? And getting ready to end the presentation here with a few caveats. You may have seen this. Some grant applications have started asking as part of the application whether the author has used any AI in writing the application. And you should just answer that honestly. I've put a sample answer on the slide. Can say, yes, I have used ChatGPT. It assisted me with refining language, structuring the proposal, proofreading, improving grammar, etc. If you used it to summarize information, state that as well. As I mentioned a little bit before, AI generated content is not protected by copyright law, and there is not federal legislation that regulates the development or use of artificial intelligence in the US. And the EU has passed the EU AI Act, which imposes pretty significant compliance obligations. And I imagine that's the way that the US will go in following that for federal regulations here. I want to talk a little bit about the ethical use of AI. Yes, it can be used ethically. Like any tool, it can also be used unethically. You just want to be transparent about its role in your grant writing process. Check the guidelines of the funder to make sure that they don't specifically prohibit it. It's fine to use it to review and edit, but you have to have a human review the final product. AI might not fully grasp certain things, and you don't want to turn in something that's mumbo jumbo. You also want to verify that the AI tool that you're using has privacy and security protocols. For example, if you're putting in information about your nonprofit's financials or demographics or things like that, those are private information categories, and you want to make sure that your tool follows encryption standards and complies with the regulations that are there to prevent unauthorized access to your data. Ultimately, AI should be viewed as an assistant, not a substitute for your work. It should not replace human effort. You shouldn't copy and paste AI content directly into your proposal without rewriting it yourself. But it's definitely ethical to use it to brainstorm ideas, to draft outlines, to refine your metrics. There are a number of new programs out there you may have seen marketing for. They're marketed to grant writers and fund development professionals, such as fundwriter.ai. It's advertised as a fundraising assistant. There are some others called Grantable. That's at grantable.co. And another one called Granted. That's at granted.ai. So a few final takeaways. Use ChatGPT and other similar tools when you are starting the process. You can use search engines to find funders. You can summarize grant instructions. You can brainstorm ideas. But when you're in the middle of the process and you're drafting those responses, you want that to be done from scratch by hand, the old-fashioned way, to the extent you can. And then when you're looking at the end of the process, ChatGPT again comes in and is helpful to make sure you've completely answered questions, to help you with word or character limits, check your grammar, improve your clarity. And you can also ask it to provide input about your draft. Finally, final word on all of this is have an actual human, preferably more than one, do a final read through of any portion of the application where you use ChatGPT in any fashion.